Now that we have the values from our web scraping activity stored in lists, we can now easily combine the data into a Pandas data frame and then subsequently analyze it. Now, a data frame using the Pandas library is simply an object that can store table information, and it makes data analysis very easy to perform. Now, in order to create a data frame, we can first of all call upon the DataFrame class. But first, seeing as we want to use the Pandas library, we need to import pandas. So we'll import pandas as PD, and then we'll set a variable called weather. We can then set this equal to a call on the Pandas library. We can then place a dot, and then we will call upon the DataFrame class. So we'll put DataFrame followed by parentheses. Now we can pass in each list of values that we've obtained from our web scraping activity as values in a dictionary, with the keys being the column headers that we want to stipulate in our table. So we can open up curly braces to initiate a dictionary, and our first column will be called period, so we can put period as a string, and this will be the first key. We can then put a colon, and then we can set the value to be the list that we created above, which we stored in a variable called periods. We can then put a comma. Our second column header will be called short_desk. We can then put a colon, and the value will be that list that we stored in the variable short_desks. We can do the same for temperature, so we can put a column name called temp, and we'll have the values coming from that list that we stored as temps. And finally, we can have a column called desk, and we'll set this equal to the values that are stored in the list in variable desks. If I then take a look to see what's now stored in the weather variable, you can see we get a very neatly presented table that contains all the information we requested from our Los Angeles forecast webpage. We can see the period from today all the way through till Sunday. We've got a short description for each day, the temperatures, and a longer description. Now, if we wanted to, we could perform some analysis on this data frame. So let's suppose we wanted to convert the temp column into a number only, so that we can then work out the average temperature across this time horizon. So we'll first of all create a regular expression, so we can put double quotes, and we'll put parentheses, and inside parentheses a backslash followed by a D followed by a plus symbol. Now don't worry too much about this for now. I cover regular expressions in a separate section, and this will make complete sense once you've covered it. This is merely an example as to how data analysis could be performed. I will store this regular expression in a variable called search, and then I will create a variable called temp_nums. We can then extract the information from the temp column like so. We could put weather, then open square brackets and pass in the column temp. We can then put .str, which lets pandas know that we're working with a string object. We can then put .extract. We can extract the number from this column by passing in the regex expression, which we've stored in a variable called search. And we will set another parameter known as expand to equal the boolean false. I can now set another column in our data frame, so if I were to set a column called temp_num by putting weather, then opening square brackets, then putting temp_num, we can set this equal to the variable above called temp_nums. We can convert this into an integer by putting dot as type, and then in parentheses we can pass in int. When I take a look to see what's stored in the column temp_num, so if I put weather, open square brackets, and then put the column name temp_num, you can see we get a list of values. But if I then simply call upon the mean method on this column, you can see that we get an average temperature across this time horizon of 74.11 recurring. So that's useful information. Now let's suppose I just want to filter for nighttime temperatures, which I can see have a temperature preceded with the word low. So if I create a variable called is_low and set this equal to weather and then pass into square brackets temp, access the .str then .contains method and pass in the string low, I can now set a column called is_low by putting weather opening square brackets and passing in is_low. I can then set this to the is_low variable which we've created above, and this will be a Boolean value, so either true or false. If I now want to filter for those values which only stipulate true in this column, I can set our data frame called weather to equal weather open square brackets and then pass in that Boolean expression. So if I pass in weather open square brackets again and pass in is_low, which we know is either true or false, when I now look at the weather data frame, we only obtain the periods which are at night. We can see that the temp numbers are 61, 62, 63 and 63, and these are all the values that are of low temperature. So very basic analytics performed on this data frame, but what you should get out of this is that we've extracted this data from a website by utilizing web scraping capabilities. We've then stored the data in a list and then converted it into a data frame, and then it was ready for us to perform analytics on top of, depending on our needs. So you've witnessed now lots of web scraping capabilities, but your web scraping learning shouldn't stop here. You should continue to embark on web scraping projects in order to ensure you understand the core features of the requests and the BeautifulSoup library. Consider scraping news articles, maybe more weather forecasts, even stock prices from Yahoo Finance. Maybe even start by searching for a different state within the United States and obtain the forecast for that state. If anything was unclear about web scraping in this section, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section or reach out to me personally, and we'll ensure you get your understanding back on track. I'll see you in the next section.